Josephine "Josie" Whitmore was 24 years old and 6 months pregnant when her neighbors decided that building a cabin facing north proved grief had destroyed her judgment. It was July 1874 in Wyoming Territory near Laramie, and every homesteader understood basic cabin orientation: face south for winter sun exposure and warmth. Nobody faced north deliberately unless they wanted to freeze in darkness. Josie had arrived in Wyoming Territory 4 months earlier as widow of Benjamin Whitmore, a railroad worker who died in March 1874 when a coupling accident crushed him between freight cars. A death that was instantaneous, brutal, and left Josie 6 months pregnant, facing frontier life alone with limited resources and uncertain future. Benjamin had been working for Union Pacific Railroad as coupling operator, the dangerous job of connecting freight cars together using manual couplings that required standing between cars as they moved together. The work paid well, $40 monthly, specifically because it was among the most dangerous railroad jobs available. March 18, 1874, had been routine coupling work in the Laramie yards. Benjamin was connecting empty freight cars being assembled into westbound train. The technique required standing between 2 cars as they rolled together slowly, holding the coupling mechanism, timing the connection precisely as heavy cars came together with momentum. The accident happened when the car behind Benjamin rolled faster than expected. Coupling operator controlling that car had misjudged the momentum. Instead of rolling together gently at walking pace, the rear car accelerated to perhaps 5 miles per hour. Benjamin had perhaps 2 seconds warning, heard the increased wheel noise, turned to see car approaching too fast, tried to jump clear. Didn't make it. The coupling he was holding caught his jacket, keeping him between the cars as they came together. 300 tons of iron and wood freight cars compressed the space where he stood from 4 feet to 0 in approximately 1 second. Death was instantaneous, from massive crushing trauma to chest and abdomen. The railroad paid death settlement of $800, standard compensation for coupling accidents that killed workers roughly monthly on Union Pacific lines. Josie received the money 6 weeks after Benjamin's death, along with notification that she needed to vacate railroad housing within 30 days. She'd been 4 months pregnant when Benjamin died, 6 months pregnant when forced to leave railroad housing, arriving in Laramie with $800 and determination to claim homestead land rather than becoming dependent on charity or degrading work available to pregnant widows. She'd spent her first Wyoming winter boarding with the Fletcher family while recovering from Benjamin's death and planning her homestead claim. Had watched them struggle with brutal north wind that dominated Wyoming winter weather pattern from November through March. Their cabin faced south for sun exposure, conventional wisdom everyone followed without question. But the south-facing door opened directly into prevailing north wind, creating catastrophic heat loss and dangerous conditions every time door needed opening during winter. The Fletcher cabin was well built. Thick log walls, proper chinking, good fireplace, adequate windows. Should have been warm and comfortable. And it was warm inside, fire burning steadily, south windows admitting winter sun, interior temperature perhaps 65 degrees on cold January afternoon. But the moment Walter needed to step outside for any reason, fetching firewood, checking livestock, retrieving water, he faced brutal reality of south-facing door orientation. Would approach door from warm interior, brace himself mentally for the shock, grab door handle, pull inward against wind pressure, trying to hold it shut. Door would swing open and north wind would blast into warm interior with physical force. 0-degree air moving at 30 miles per hour would pour through the opening like invisible flood. Temperature would drop 5 degrees in the first 10 seconds as cold, dense air displaced warm air. Candles on table would flicker and extinguish. Papers near door would scatter. Everyone in the cabin would feel the brutal cold invasion. Walter would step through quickly, pull door shut, fighting wind pressure, accomplish whatever task required outdoor exposure, return to door. Opening it from outside was even harder. Wind pressure held door closed, requiring significant force to pull it open against the wind. Would grab handle, plant feet, pull hard, creating gap large enough to squeeze through, push inside, fight door closed against wind, trying to hold it open. Inside, the family would huddle near fire, recovering from the temperature loss. Would take perhaps 15 to 20 minutes of steady burning to restore the 5 degrees lost during 30 seconds of door opening. Over the course of a winter day, with perhaps 6 necessary outdoor trips, the cumulative heat loss was substantial, maybe 30 degrees total temperature drop, requiring significant extra wood burning to compensate. The psychological toll was equally significant. Every outdoor trip became a dreaded event. Would delay as long as possible, then make quick, desperate dash, rushing task to minimize wind exposure. Children learned to cluster near fire away from door, knowing that door opening meant brutal cold blast. The cabin that should have been comfortable sanctuary became place where necessary activities meant repeated wind invasion. Josie had watched this pattern through January and February, analyzing the cause. The problem wasn't Fletcher's construction quality or heating capability. The problem was fundamental orientation, door facing toward the wind source rather than away from it. Every south-facing cabin in Wyoming faced identical problem, because prevailing wind came from north, while conventional wisdom said face south for sun. Josie had analyzed the problem and recognized that conventional south-facing orientation optimized for sun but ignored wind, the more dangerous enemy in Wyoming winter. The solution wasn't facing south toward sun, but facing north toward wind, creating wind block wall that protected door and working areas from brutal north gusts. The design crystallized through spring. Build cabin facing north with solid windowless wall toward prevailing wind. Place door on south side, lee side protected from north wind by the cabin structure itself. Windows on east and west walls for light and sun. The north orientation would sacrifice direct south sun exposure, but gain crucial wind protection, making outdoor work and door access survivable during winter storms. The community's reaction when Josie explained the plan was immediate alarm, mixed with genuine fear for her survival. She was pregnant widow, planning to face cabin away from winter sun. Would freeze in dark, north-facing structure while burning through limited firewood supply. The conventional wisdom was absolute, face south for sun and warmth. Walter Fletcher, age 44, the homesteader she'd boarded with, tried to explain why north-facing orientation would kill her and her unborn child in early July. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said gravely, "cabin orientation toward south is fundamental survival principle in Wyoming. Winter sun through south windows provides warming beyond what fire alone can achieve. North-facing cabin receives no direct sun, stays cold and dark, requires excessive wood burning. You're 6 months pregnant, planning to winter alone in structure designed to be cold. This will kill you and the baby." "South-facing cabin provides sun but exposes door to north wind," Josie countered. "Every door opening during winter admits brutal wind that drops interior temperature drastically. North-facing cabin blocks wind from door and working areas. I'll survive better protected from wind than exposed to slightly more sun." "What about light?" asked Chester Harrison, age 38, a practical farmer concerned about basic living conditions. "North-facing cabin is dark. No south windows means no direct winter light. You'll live in gloom for 6 months, burning lamp oil you can't afford." "East and west windows provide adequate light," Josie explained. "Morning sun through east window, afternoon through west window. Not direct south exposure, but sufficient. And darkness is preferable to wind exposure that makes outdoor work impossible." She proceeded with her plan, despite warnings and predictions she'd freeze. Hired no laborers, couldn't afford them despite railroad settlement, and needed to prove the design was achievable by pregnant woman working carefully. Construction began in mid-July and required solving the challenge of building alone while 6 months pregnant and managing energy carefully. The cabin would be modest. 12 by 14 feet floor plan, 8-foot walls, simple gabled roof. Small enough to heat efficiently, large enough for woman and infant, achievable working solo. The foundation used stone and timber, dug shallow trenches around perimeter, filled with rocks creating drainage base, laid timber sills creating level foundation frame. The work was manageable, lifting moderate stones, positioning timbers, checking level frequently. Took 1 week working mornings when temperature was coolest. The walls would be log construction, horizontal logs notched and stacked, creating sturdy structure. She needed approximately 40 logs, 8 inches diameter, 14 feet long for the longer walls, 12 feet for shorter walls. Cut them from nearby pine forest using axe and saw, work that was exhausting but achievable, taking frequent breaks. Each log weighed perhaps 150 pounds, too heavy for pregnant woman to carry, but movable using horse and drag rope. Wood fell tree trimmed to length, attach rope, have horse drag it to construction site. Slow, careful work requiring 2 weeks to harvest and position all 40 logs. The critical element was wall orientation. The north wall would be solid, windowless, thick barrier against prevailing wind. She built it using the largest, straightest logs, chinked gaps carefully with clay and moss, creating impenetrable barrier. This wall would bear the brunt of winter wind, protecting everything behind it. South wall would have the door, centered, 4 feet wide, opening into wind-protected area sheltered by cabin mass. East and west walls would each have 1 window, simple openings with wooden shutters that could close during storms but open for light and air during calm weather. The roof was simple gabled design, rafters creating peak running east-west, perpendicular to north-south axis, covered with split shakes creating weather protection. The gabled shape would shed snow effectively, while creating minimal resistance to north wind flowing over the structure. By late August, the cabin structure was complete. Solid north wall facing prevailing wind, protected south door, east-west windows for light. From outside, it looked wrong. Main wall facing the wrong direction, door hidden on lee side. Unconventional orientation that violated every rule. Inside, the space was compact but well designed. The solid north wall created psychological comfort, knowing brutal wind would hit thick logs rather than thin door or window. The south door meant stepping outside into protected calm rather than straight into wind blast. The east-west windows provided cross-ventilation during summer, adequate light during winter. Josie moved into the cabin, September 1st at 7 months pregnant. Had 2 months to prepare for childbirth and winter. Spent September cutting and stacking 3 cords of firewood, gathering food supplies, preparing necessities. The physical work was limited by pregnancy, but the cabin location and orientation made outdoor work manageable even in her condition. The first test of windblock orientation came September 20th, early autumn storm with 30-mile-per-hour north wind and cold rain. Temperature dropped from 60 degrees to 40 degrees as storm moved through. Conventional south-facing cabins throughout Laramie area experienced the familiar problem. Warm inside, but brutal wind invasion whenever door opened. Walter Fletcher's cabin faced south. His door opened into north wind. When he needed to fetch firewood from his stacked position south of cabin, he'd open door and north wind would blast into warm interior, dropping temperature immediately, extinguishing candles, creating swirling chaos. He'd grab firewood quickly, return inside, fight door closed against wind pressure, spend 20 minutes recovering lost warmth. Josie's north-facing cabin performed exactly as designed. The solid north wall took the full force of 30-mile wind without effect. Thick logs and careful chinking prevented any penetration. The south door opened into calm, protected area on lee side. When Josie needed firewood from her stack positioned on south side, She'd open door into relative calm, walk few steps to stack sheltered by cabin mass, gather wood leisurely, return inside without any wind invasion. The difference was dramatic. Fletcher fighting wind to accomplish basic tasks. Josie working in protected calm despite same storm affecting both locations. Through October, as Josie's pregnancy progressed to term, the wind protection became increasingly valuable. Pregnant woman at 8 months couldn't fight brutal wind to accomplish necessary outdoor work. But protected Southside remained calm enough for her to move safely, gather firewood, access water, maintain basic homesteading tasks. She gave birth October 15th with help from neighboring women who'd responded to her signal. The baby, a girl she named Rebecca, was healthy despite Josie's solo winter preparation. The cabin's wind protection had made outdoor work possible through late pregnancy when exposed conditions would have been dangerous. The proof of north-facing genius came during sustained winter wind in December, 5 days of brutal north wind with gusts to 50 miles per hour and temperature near zero. Conventional south-facing orientation became catastrophic liability, while north-facing proved life-saving design. The December storm started on the 8th, with temperature at 20 degrees dropping to zero as north wind increased from light breeze to sustained gale. By afternoon, December 8th, wind was sustained 35 to 40 miles per hour, with gusts exceeding 50. Temperature continued falling, 0 degrees by evening, dropping to -5 overnight. The wind would continue at these levels for 5 days straight, 120 hours of brutal sustained assault that tested every structure, every orientation, every survival strategy. Walter Fletcher's south-facing cabin faced the wind assault at its most vulnerable point, the door positioned on south wall opening directly into north wind flow. The door became critical failure point, not just for heat loss, but for basic access and survival. December 8th evening, Fletcher needed firewood from his stack positioned on south side of cabin, roughly 20 feet from door. His interior fire was burning low, interior temperature dropping toward 50 degrees as sunset, and exterior temperature fell to 0. He needed wood immediately, but dreaded the door opening. Approached door from warm interior, braced himself, grabbed handle, pulled door inward against wind pressure. The 40-mile wind created significant force, holding door closed. Required hard pull to overcome the pressure, creating sudden opening as door broke free from wind resistance. North wind blasted into warm interior with violence that was shocking even to someone who'd experienced it hundreds of times. 0-degree air, moving at 40 miles per hour, poured through the opening, creating wind chill of -35 degrees. The cold, dense air flooded across floor, rose toward ceiling, displaced warm air creating instant 10-degree temperature drop throughout cabin. Walter's wife Ida and their 3 children huddled near fireplace, pulling blankets around themselves as cold wave hit them. Candles extinguished, papers blew from table. Cold air penetrated clothing instantly, creating bone-deep chill. Walter stepped outside into full wind blast, leaving door open briefly because pulling it shut from inside, then reopening from outside was too difficult. The 20 feet to firewood stack took perhaps 30 seconds fighting wind. Leaning into the blast, shuffling forward, reaching stack, grabbed several pieces of split wood, turned back toward door visible across the 20-foot gap. Walking back, loaded with wood, was harder. Arms full, couldn't be used for balance. Wind tried to knock him sideways. Feet slipped on icy ground. Reached door, stepped through still open entrance, dropped wood near fireplace, returned to door, pushed it closed, fighting wind pressure, trying to hold it open. Required full body weight against door to force it shut against sustained 40-mile wind. Total time door open, approximately 90 seconds. Interior temperature drop, 12 degrees from 65 to 53. Time to recover lost temperature, 25 minutes burning extra wood. Total exposure to -35 wind chill. 2 minutes that left Walter's face numb, fingers painful despite gloves. body shaking from cold shock. And this was one firewood trip. He'd need to repeat similar process perhaps 6 times daily to maintain adequate fire through 5-day storm. Each trip meant brutal wind exposure, dangerous conditions, significant heat loss, extra wood consumption. By December 10th, day 3, Fletcher household had reduced outdoor trips to absolute minimum. Were burning furniture, chairs, small table, to avoid the dangerous wind exposure required to fetch outdoor wood supply that was only 20 feet away, but might as well have been miles in those conditions. Meanwhile, Josie's north-facing cabin with infant Rebecca experienced the same 5-day storm from completely different orientation that transformed dangerous conditions into manageable routine. December 8th evening, Josie needed firewood from her stack positioned in protected lee zone on south side of cabin, roughly 15 feet from door. Her interior fire was burning low, temperature dropping toward 58 degrees, requiring wood soon. Bundled Rebecca warmly in multiple wool layers, creating protected cocoon. Put infant in sling against her chest, where body heat would keep baby warm. Approached south door from interior. Unlatched door, pulled it open. The door opened into relative calm, perhaps 5-mile wind in the protected lee versus 40-mile wind on north side. No resistance to door movement, no blast of wind invading interior, no temperature drop from opening. The cabin mass blocked north wind, creating sheltered zone extending 10 to 15 feet south. Stepped outside into protected area with Rebecca secured against her chest. Wind was noticeable, but manageable. 5 to 10 miles per hour, creating wind chill perhaps 0 degrees versus interior 58 degrees. Cold, but not dangerous. Walked 15 feet to firewood stack, positioned intentionally in lee zone. Selected several pieces of well-split wood, examined them in adequate light from cabin windows. Carried wood back to door, stepped inside, closed door easily, no wind resistance to fight. Total time outside, perhaps 2 minutes. Wind chill exposure, 0 degrees for 2 minutes versus Walter's -35 for 2 minutes. Interior temperature change, 0 degrees because no wind invasion. Rebecca's condition, comfortable and warm in protected sling throughout the process. The difference wasn't subtle. It was the difference between dangerous, desperate survival and comfortable, manageable routine. Fletcher burning furniture because wind made outdoor access too dangerous. Josie maintaining adequate fire because accessing fuel was safe and easy, even carrying infant in brutal storm conditions. On December 12th, day 4 of sustained wind, Walter Fletcher walked to Josie's cabin to check on the pregnant widow and infant he'd expected to find freezing or dead from exposure in the backwards north-facing structure everyone had warned against. Approached from southeast following terrain that provided slight wind shelter, noticed immediately that wind conditions changed dramatically as he neared her cabin. A distance of 100 feet from cabin, wind was full 40-mile sustained blast, requiring leaning forward to walk into it. Face numb from wind chill, eyes watering from cold wind, breathing difficult because wind tried to pull air from lungs. This was the brutal Wyoming winter wind everyone knew and fought. At 50 feet from cabin approaching from southeast, wind decreased noticeably to perhaps 30 miles per hour. The cabin structure itself was creating disruption in wind flow, generating sheltered zone downwind on lee side. At 20 feet from cabin's south side, wind was only 10 to 15 miles per hour, manageable breeze rather than brutal gale. The cabin mass was blocking north wind, creating substantial protected area. Fletcher stopped and turned slowly, observing wind from different positions. Facing north toward cabin, wind was gentle. Facing south away from cabin, wind tried to push him over. Walked to Josie's south door, knocked. She answered carrying infant Rebecca bundled in warm wrappings. Invited Fletcher inside. He stepped through door and immediately noticed no wind blast as door opened, no temperature drop, no cold invasion. Opening door on lee side meant opening into protected calm rather than direct wind. Inside, cabin was warm, perhaps 60 degrees from moderate fire. Rebecca was sleeping peacefully, clearly healthy and comfortable. Josie looked tired, but well, managing solo with infant in brutal storm because cabin orientation made necessary outdoor work safe rather than dangerous. "You're outside working," Fletcher said, having observed the scene that seemed impossible. 5-day storm with 40-mile wind and 0 degrees. I'm burning furniture because retrieving firewood is too dangerous in those conditions. You're maintaining adequate fire, caring for newborn infant, surviving comfortably. How? Josie led Fletcher outside to demonstrate the wind protection effect. They walked around cabin together with Rebecca bundled against Josie's chest. Started on south side in protected calm, walked east around corner. Wind increased noticeably. Continued north around second corner onto north side. Full 40-mile wind blast hit them instantly. Brutal sustained gale that required leaning into it, made talking difficult, numbed exposed skin in seconds. Fletcher examined her north wall from this position. Solid log barrier, taking enormous wind pressure directly. Looked at gaps between logs, carefully chinked with clay and moss, creating airtight seal. No wind penetrating through structure. All wind energy hitting thick barrier, deflecting up and around, creating protected lee downwind. They returned quickly to south side, entering protected zone. Wind dropped from 40 miles per hour to 5 or 10 within 3 steps around the corner. The cabin was functioning as designed, solid wind barrier creating downwind shelter. The cabin mass blocks wind flow creating protected zone on south lee side, Josie explained. North wall faces prevailing wind taking full force with solid barrier. Door, firewood access. All outdoor work happens in protected south zone where wind is 60 to 70% reduced. Your south-facing orientation puts door and access in direct wind path. Fletcher understood now why his conventional cabin was dangerous, while her unconventional design was safe. His door faced into the wind, requiring fighting 40-mile blast for every access. Her door faced away from wind, opening into protected calm. Same storm, opposite experience. Fletcher examined her north wall from outside. Solid log barrier taking enormous wind pressure without any penetration. Looked at gaps between logs. Carefully chinked with clay and moss, creating airtight seal. The wall was engineered specifically as wind barrier rather than just being incidental exterior surface. They went inside, where infant Rebecca slept peacefully. The interior was warm, perhaps 60 degrees from moderate fire, and completely calm despite wind roaring outside. No drafts, no cold spots, no evidence that brutal storm was assaulting the structure. Your unconventional orientation sacrifices south sun exposure, Fletcher said, understanding settling in. But it gains crucial wind protection that makes winter survival manageable rather than desperate. I face south to get sun, but every door opening is dangerous wind battle. You face north to block wind and door access is protected calm. By spring 1875, 7 households in Laramie area had built north-facing cabins using Josie's wind block principles. Not all faced directly north, some angled northwest or northeast based on local wind patterns. But all prioritized wind protection over sun exposure, recognizing that Wyoming survival depended more on blocking brutal wind than capturing modest winter sun. Josie became respected consultant, helped neighbors analyze prevailing wind direction, advised on orientation and windbreak wall construction, designed protected door placement, was paid in labor barter, sometimes food, occasionally cash. The income supported her and Rebecca comfortably. She lived in the north-facing cabin for 18 years, from 1874 to 1892, when she remarried and moved to Cheyenne. The orientation proved superior throughout those years, the wind protection making winter outdoor work manageable rather than impossible. Josie lived until 1938, dying at age 88. Her obituary mentioned her railroad settlement and solo homesteading, but focused primarily on the north-facing cabin. The orientation that proved survival wasn't about facing the sun, but blocking the wind. Modern analysis of similar wind-oriented structures confirmed the principles. South-facing door experiencing wind speeds equal to ambient conditions, creating catastrophic heat loss during access. North-facing door in lee experiencing 60 to 70% wind reduction, creating manageable access conditions, representing superior winter survival through orientation alone. The story is about a pregnant widow who understood that conventional wisdom about south-facing orientation solved the wrong problem, who recognized that Wyoming winter's greatest threat was brutal north wind, not lack of southern sun, who proved that the warmest cabin isn't the one facing the sun, it's the one blocking the wind, because sometimes survival is about protection rather than exposure. The north-facing cabin everyone called backwards kept woman and infant alive, while south-facing cabins forced families to burn furniture. And building alone while pregnant wasn't reckless, it was necessary engineering.